Castles. We imagine them as stone giants rising proudly from the hills, towers piercing the clouds, banners fluttering in the wind, walls thick enough to stop an army, gates that clang shut with iron teeth. We imagine knights in shining armor, ladies in silks, feasts with roast boar and silver goblets of wine. But rarely, very rarely, do we stop to ask a quieter question. What did these places smell like? Not the romantic smell of roses in the garden, not the sweet perfumes of noble ladies, but the ordinary, daily smells of hundreds of human beings crammed together behind walls of cold stone. Today, let us wander there, not with our eyes, but with our noses, through kitchens and stables, through smoky halls and damp dungeons. We will follow the trail of scents that once clung to the stones of medieval castles, and you may find that life inside a fortress smelled less like glory and more like onions, sweat, and something best left unmentioned. Let us begin with the castle walls. Stone has a smell. If you ever stepped into a basement or touched a rain-soaked wall, you'll know it. Damp, cold, a little earthy. Like soil trapped inside rock, medieval castles were filled with that smell. Thick walls absorbed moisture. They sweated in winter, and in summer, they kept in a kind of stale coolness. Visitors often wrote that castles felt close or heavy. That wasn't just the weight of the stones pressing down, it was also the smell of stone mixed with smoke and damp rushes on the floor. A smell that never quite left, no matter how much air passed through the arrow slits. So, before we even add people, animals, or cooking fires, we already have a bass note, cold, wet stone. Imagine it as the background music for all the other smells to come. The Great Hall was the heart of the castle. It was where everyone gathered, lords, servants, guards, guests. A place for eating, for talking, for sleeping. And oh, it smelled of everything. Meals left their traces in the air. Roasted meats, often heavy with garlic and onions. Cabbage boiled until it was soft as cloth. Thick bread baked in great ovens. Sometimes fish, sometimes game. The hall was filled with smoke from the hearth because chimneys were still crude and the smoke liked to linger rather than leave. Now, imagine all of that layered over time, not just today's dinner, but last night's feast, and the one before that. Smell sunk into the wooden beams, into the rushes scattered on the floor. And then there were the people themselves. Dozens, sometimes hundreds. Bathing was not frequent. Perfume was rare. The smell of sweat, of leather boots, of woolen clothes worn for weeks at a time. That smell mingled with the food, with the smoke, with the damp stone. The great hall was a feast for the eyes, but for the nose it could be overwhelming. Some chroniclers, in polite tones, called it lively, which was perhaps their way of saying strong enough to make your eyes water. If the hall was full of food, the kitchens were even more so. A medieval kitchen was not a neat place of shining pans and tidy shelves. It was a roaring fire, soot-blackened walls, and wooden tables sticky with use. Meat hung from hooks. Fish lay on slabs. Barrels of ale sweated in the corner. The smell here was sharper. Hot fat spitting into the fire. Herbs bruised beneath the cook's knife. Bread crusts blackened by ash. And underneath it all, the sour smell of blood. For meat had to be butchered near the kitchens. Animals were brought in alive, slaughtered, and cut to pieces. That meant not only blood, but the smell of offal, the parts no one wanted. The castle cats and dogs waited nearby. They knew the smell too. A kitchen was a paradise for scavengers, but for a visitor, it might have been less pleasant. Even the plates and cups carried their scents. Soap was rare. Dishes were often just rinsed. wiped with a cloth, and used again. A faint taste of yesterday's stew might cling to today's. In truth, the kitchen was not just a source of food, but one of the strongest sources of castle odor. A place both mouth-watering and stomach-turning at once. Now we come to the unavoidable, the castle toilet. Polite words were used, guardrobe, or privy. But whatever the name, the smell was the same. Most castles had toilets built into the walls, often overhanging the moat. A narrow seat, a hole, and beneath it, whatever pit or water lay below. Some emptied into cesspools, others straight into running water if the builders were clever. But the smell drifted back. There was no flushing, no sweet lavender spray, just the honest, unromantic scent of human waste. And it clung. Privy shafts ran through the walls, and sometimes the smell seeped into nearby rooms. In winter, when windows were closed tight, it was worse. Servants tried to mask it. Herbs scattered, rushes laid on the floor, even tapestries hung to trap odors. But the truth is simple. Castles were full of people, and people must relieve themselves. And so the smell of the privy was never far away. It was said that some nobles kept their finest robes in the garderobe, the privy chamber, believing the fumes would ward off moths. Perhaps that worked, but one wonders if the smell was worth it. A castle without horses was no castle at all. Horses meant knights, horses meant war, horses meant status, and horses meant smell. The stables were busy, noisy, and very close to the living quarters. Horses sweated in their stalls. Hay grew damp under their hooves. Dung piled high, waiting for someone to shovel it away. If you stood in a stable, you'll know the smell. Strong, musky, earthy. Not always unpleasant, but very strong. In a castle, it drifted beyond the stable walls. Guards and servants walked through it, carried it on their boots. The noble lord might try to perfume his hall, but he could not escape the smell of his horses. It was part of daily life, as constant as the sound of hooves on the courtyard stones. And so, little by little, we begin to build the castle's perfume. Stone and smoke, meat and sweat, privies and stables. A mixture both rich and rancid. But we are not yet finished. For castles also smelled of disease and medicine, of damp cellars and moldy bread, of laundry washed in ash, and of incense drifting faintly from the chapel. Beneath the castle, where light was scarce and air was thin, there were the dungeons. Not every castle had them, and not every prisoner ended up in chains. But where there were cells, there were smells. Damp stone again, but deeper now. Stale air. Straw bedding that grew sour with time, never fully changed. Buckets used for waste, left too long before being emptied. Prisoners, themselves unwashed, sick, sometimes wounded, added to the odor. Chroniclers rarely wrote of it, perhaps because it was taken for granted. A dungeon was not meant to be pleasant. Its very smell was part of the punishment. Visitors described them as close or dark, words that hid more than they revealed. To step inside was to breathe the weight of hopelessness mixed with mold and rot. And so, the dungeon adds its quiet, heavy note to our castle's perfume. Not all smells were unpleasant. Every castle, great or small, had a chapel, a place of prayer, of quiet, of ritual. Here the air smelled different. Incense, if the Lord could afford it. Resinous, sweet, curling in pale smoke. Beeswax candles dripping slowly onto stone altars. Sometimes fresh flowers placed before saints. Sometimes only the faint musk of old wood and old books. For some, this was the only place in the castle that smelled truly clean. A pocket of sweetness in a world of grime. A chapel could not mask the smell of the kitchens or the privies, but inside its walls, one might forget them for a little while. The chapel reminds us that medieval life was not only harsh, it had its moments of peace, its places where the air was carefully tended, where smell became part of devotion. A castle was a living place, and where there's life, there's also sickness. The smell of illness was familiar, fevers that left the body sweating, infected wounds oozing beneath bandages, the sweet, sour scent of death lingering in chambers where someone had passed. But there were also the smells of healing. Herbs crushed for remedies, rosemary, thyme, sage. Vinegar used to cleanse wounds, honey smeared on cuts. Sometimes wine boiled into tonics. The mixture was sharp, earthy, astringent, yet these could not fully cover the smell of suffering. In times of plague, castles too were struck. Corpses were hurried away, but their presence was felt in the air for days. For the medieval knows death was not hidden. It was close, ordinary, woven into the rhythm of life. Castles had to feed many mouths. Food was stored in deep, cool cellars, and these cellars had their own smells. Barrels of ale and wine, sometimes sweet, sometimes sour if spoiled. Salted meat, hanging stiff and dry. Cheese, ripening with a tang both rich and sharp. Bins of grain, sometimes damp, sometimes sprouting with mold. A cellar was both treasure and hazard. If the food spoiled, it smelled quickly. A castle under siege might be forced to eat what had gone bad, ignoring the stench for the sake of survival. The air here was heavy, like walking into a pantry that had never once been cleaned. But for those who lived there, it was simply part of life. Now, you may wonder, was there no effort to stay clean? There was, but it was difficult. Laundry was washed with lye soap made from ash and fat. The smell was acrid, biting, not the pleasant perfumes of modern detergent. Clothes hung to dry in smoky courtyards, absorbing the smells around them. A freshly washed tunic might smell more of ash and smoke than of freshness. Bathing, too, had its scents. Water heated over fires, herbs added to make it pleasant, steam rising in wooden tubs. For the short time a bath was taken, there was indeed cleanliness. But water was not always fresh, and tubs were reused, so even the smell of bathing could turn sour. It is not that medieval people loved filth. They simply lived with it, worked against it, and accepted what could not be changed. Even the small things had smells. Leather belts, oiled but still carrying the musk of the animal. Iron weapons with a faint tang of rust. Wool cloaks, heavy and lanolin rich. Writing ink, sharp with oak galls. Wax seals, warm and faintly sweet. The faint burnt scent of tallow lamps. These tiny details filled the air, unnoticed perhaps, but all was there. The castle was not one smell, but thousands, all layered together. So now, let us step back. What did a medieval castle smell like? It smelled of stone, of smoke, of kitchens thick with meat and onions, of privies tucked into the walls, of horses and dung, of incense and wax, of mold and medicine, of life in all its messy fullness. It was not a single smell, but a tapestry, threads of pleasant and unpleasant, of sacred and profane woven tightly together. For those who lived there, it was ordinary. The nose grows used to what it meets each day. Just as we do not notice the hum of our machines, they did not always notice the smell of their halls. It was simply the background to life, like the beat of a heart. And yet, if we could step back in time, it would strike us first. Not the sight of the towers, but the smell at the gate. Strong, heavy, human. Perhaps not glorious, but real. And maybe that is the truest way to understand medieval life. Not through the glitter of armor or the weight of stone, but through the smells that clung to every corner, every rush-strewn floor, every breath of air within those walls. So, when you next imagine a castle, do not forget your nose, for without it, the picture is only half complete.